if everyone's healthy. And I guess it's going to become interesting as we go down on these outlooks is like, how do they look with Jimmy versus how might they look with Trey is kind of how we're going to have to view some of these. But if everyone's healthy, how do you see these targets being divided there? It's pretty now with Aiyuk coming on, Deebo, if he's healthy, and Kittle obviously, has been the main vein for so long. How do you see that all shaking out?
Well, Kittle always has to lead the team in targets if he's healthy. He's their best player. But then after that, it's like, is it Aiyuk or Deebo? And to me, that depends on which quarterback it is. Now, I haven't seen Trey Lance play on the 49ers, and maybe he's going to love Deebo, but it seems to me that his value is very much tied to Jimmy Garoppolo because Jimmy doesn't want to throw down the field anymore. So he really benefits from Deebo Samuel's pop passes and slants and all that yards after the catch. Aiyuk is good at that stuff too, but not as good. He's not just going to break 8 tackles a play like Deebo can and has. His potential is down the field, and Trey Lance has a cannon. So I think as Lance gets more integrated in the offense and eventually becomes a starter, you're going to see Aiyuk become a Pro Bowl level wide receiver who's averaging 16, 17 yards a catch, getting 1,400 yards a season. But that might be 2-3 years down the line.
Absolutely. Oh, man. I had Aiyuk in fantasy myself last year. And speaking of that guy, like there was a stretch. He literally like single-handedly dragged my team to the playoffs at a certain point. It was weeks 7 through 15. He was the wide receiver 3 in terms of his fantasy points per game, only behind Tyreek and Devontae Adams, scoring over 20 fantasy points. I ended up finishing as a rookie wide receiver 17. So a top 24 guy right there, your classic wide receiver 2. What are you expecting as a sophomore? I know you said it might be 2 to 3 years down the line. He might be a perennial Pro Bowler to catching those deep bombs with Trey Lance. Do you see any of that upside still carrying over as a sophomore here this year?
I love Brandon Aiyuk. I mean, he's got it. It's just the situation he's in. I mean, he's playing on a team now that's in flux at quarterback, and the new guy isn't going to be throwing a ton right away. And he's splitting targets with George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Kyle Juszczyk, Raheem Mostert. It's not a lot of targets to go around. Now, he's probably going to get the second most targets after Kittle because he's that good. But still, is that 6 targets a game? Is that 7 targets a game? Eventually, he's going to merit 11, 12 targets a game. But I'm saying that could be 2022. It's as a football player, he's premier. As a fantasy football option, I just wonder how many targets he's going to get. Because as you mentioned, he went crazy last year. Kittle was hurt. Deebo was hurt. So if those guys are healthy, they're going to all have to split him.
Absolutely.
On a run first team.
100%. And during that crazy stretch, he was averaging right around 11 targets a game, like you just said. And who knows if it's going to be there, especially if it does get a little more run heavy with Trey Lance, if and when he does take over at some point. So then that kind of brings the question about Kittle, your expectations for him. Like, is there room for more, or do you see regression? Because he's going, late second, where there's still some really strong wide receivers, some really strong running backs there for fantasy. Darren Waller is also there, who's like the main option over there for Oakland, or LA now, rather, for the Raiders.
Vegas.
So is Kittle now, should we consider this a downgrade for him that Trey Lance is there, that all these other targets are starting to emerge? Do you think he is still worth it? Because he's been such an edge at that tight end position, really only behind Travis Kelce since he became into the spotlight there. What are your thoughts on Kittle in 2021?
I got 2 things with Kittle. One is the injuries. He gets hurt. Usually it was just for a game or 2 a year, but he plays through a lot of pain, breaks, and broken stuff. And last year he missed 8 games. I want to say 6 or 8 games. He just plays a very physical style of football. He's entering his late 20s. What's his body going to be like? Is he going to keep missing time? That's the first thing. And the other thing you said, is there more there with Kittle? I feel like we've been talking about this for years. They don't use him in the red zone. They don't use him in the red zone. He's a great player, but I'd rather have Travis Kelce or Darren Waller or anyone who gets your tight end should be getting targets in the red. Why are you not throwing to George Kittle? He's 6'4". What are you doing? So I would call, I know Kyle must have a reason, and that's fine. Kittle isn't the greatest contested catch guy in the world. Fine. So 14 touchdowns in 4 years, that's not what you want from a tight end guy that you're taking that high in a fantasy football draft. I don't know if that's going to change. I think the guy who's becoming the red zone guy is Aiyuk. Go back and look at their targets. He got more targets in the red zone than Kendrick Bourne last year. Aiyuk's the one with the really long wingspan. So I think you're going to get more of the same from George Kittle, which is terrific, but it's just more of the same. Not a lot of scoring.
Absolutely, yeah, and maybe not worth it. I typically don't take that plunge on Kittle late round 2, early round 3. I'm looking more at the wide receivers there, more at the running backs in that range because of those exact concerns. No, never his
His
top 5.
value is his blocking. He's a better football player than fantasy football
Oh,
player. You guys
100.
score touchdowns in fantasy football.
He might be. I think he is the best tight end in football, real life
Yeah.
wise. But
Yes.
Travis Kelce, fantasy wise, he's speaking of touchdowns in the red zone. I mean, every year you're getting 10, 15. Like it's
Right.
ridiculous. So
That's
it
right.
just shows the difference between, just because you're the best in real life doesn't always mean so.
It's totally different. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
100%. So in that realm, then, how do you see? Again, I can't believe the fact that he's only never topped 5 touchdowns, though. As you were saying, it's like 6'4" monster. I don't get it. How do you see the touchdowns shaking out? Is Aiyuk going to lead this team in touchdowns this year, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think in the red zone, you're going to see them run a lot. Like if Trey Lance isn't their starter, but they want to get him on the field as much as possible because they feel he can't develop on the sideline, which he can't, then boom, red zone. You see so much quarterback driven run game in the red zone. I wonder how many targets, but again, it's Kyle Shanahan tendencies. You know who he wants to go to. It's been Kendrick Bourne forever. He's gone. It was Jordan Reed. He's gone. It was Brandon Aiyuk last year. It's going to be Aiyuk. He doesn't call throws for basically Deebo or Kittle in the red zone. I don't know why, but he doesn't. Keep that in mind. If you have those two dudes on your team, they're going to get you yards, not points. And so they're trying to figure out who's going to take. I have some sleepers. Ross Dwelly. I've been talking about this guy for years. People kind of make fun of him, but he's 6'5". He's never dropped a pass in his life. Well, in his career, professional career. Long arms, great hand-eye coordination. The perfect replacement for Kendrick Bourne in the red zone. Ross Dwelly, check that one out. They don't have a tight end who can challenge him. They didn't. Jordan Reed is gone. There's no Austin Hooper, which they were rumored to be interested in him. It's Dwelly time, baby, and I think he can have an impact.
That's a really interesting 2-1 because you think of, like, we often call the running backs the handcuffs with benefits, right? The Kareem Hunt getting you some decent value on his own, but if anything happens to Nick Chubb, he's an absolute stud. And you already mentioned George Kittle's injury history, so it's like if we're getting some value with Dwelly on touchdowns anyways, and for the most part, tight end, other than Kittle, Kelce, and a handful of others, you're just hoping for a touchdown and you're happy at fantasy because there's just garbage at the position. So if this guy is getting 7, 8 touchdowns this year, plus the upside if anything happens to Kittle, that's a really interesting name that I don't think anybody has on their radar right now. You
got to understand, the Niners got to replace about 30 to 40 targets in the red zone from last year. And Deebo and Kittle will take some of them, but Kyle doesn't like calling their number in the red zone. He certainly doesn't really get them the ball in the end zone. It's more like, here's a ball in the flat, go break 7 tackles and try to get in if you can. The guys that he calls passes for in the end zone are Brandon Aiyuk and a bunch of dudes who aren't on this team anymore. Dwelly could be one of them to fill the void. Yeah.
Well, speaking of one of the bigger names who might not be involved in the red zone, but has been quite involved whenever he is on the field, that's Deebo. And obviously last year missed a lot of time with that foot injury. Before that happened, he was a popular 5th-round pick, and now he's fallen right around round 8 or so. Do you think we get a fully healthy Deebo in 2021, and what do you expect from him in his 3rd season?
Well, here's the thing with Deebo. I think last year he broke his foot in June working out. So let's see how he gets through the offseason. Yeah. Last year in May at this time, he was looking great, and then something broke. So it's nothing that Deebo's doing wrong, but he's had injury issues since college. They've been consistent, and I'm not going to say that for sure he's not going to have them anymore. If you're drafting Deebo Samuel, that's something you have to be aware of, that he could miss most of the season. He did last year. Hamstring history, broken bone history. But so far he's healthy. So monitor it throughout the offseason. If he gets to training camp in one piece, that's a very good sign. He did it in 2019 and was a monster. So if he's healthy and hasn't had any setback, here's the problem with Deebo. If he breaks a bone, he gains weight, he comes back, he pulls his hamstring. So if he can just stay in shape and not miss a month, then he'll be fine. But when he misses a month, he comes back, hurts himself again, and it's just a cycle. So as long as he can stay consistently healthy and on track and in shape the offseason, he'll be fine.
And if he does stay healthy, let's assume, a big assumption clearly, but if he does play 16, what are you kind of seeing for his stats at the end of the year?
Oh man. Okay, all-purpose yards, we're talking more than 1,000,
Mhm.
like 800 receiving yards, 400 rushing yards, something like that, and like 3 touchdowns somehow.
Very solid.
Two from like 40 yards out, and then one fluke one in the red zone. 3 touchdowns, 1,200 all purpose.
It doesn't. Why doesn't he ever throw to Deebo or Kittle? Is there like any viable explanation that you can think of?
Deebo has short arms. Deebo has short arms, and he's 5'11", 5'10". George Kittle, great with the ball in his hands, but Kyle feels like he's not a contested catch guy. I mean, he didn't catch that many passes. He's not a natural receiver, but if you get the ball in his hands, he'll just run through the entire defense. When it comes to like getting open in short areas, they trust Bourne, Aiyuk, Jordan Reed, guys with a little more shiftiness and a little bit better ability to catch the ball extended away from their frame. I mean, how many catches can you remember George Kittle making like that in his career? He can do it, but it's not something he does consistently.
Right. I don't get it. I hope it turns around for him, but it looks more like it'd be an outlier if he ever had like a 10 touchdown season than the truth, just because 5 is his career high. I just don't get it. You mentioned Dwelly as a sleeper already as a pass catcher. Is there anybody else that we should have on our radar, or should we move our attention to the run game at this point?
Well, the Niners really don't have a number 3 receiver. They lost Kendrick Bourne, didn't replace him. They have Richie James Jr., who they've never really made. He gets some chances, but they don't really give him a chance. I mean, what did I just say? They give him some chances, but he never really gets a consistent role no matter what he does. Jalen Hurd hasn't been able to be healthy in 2 years. I think it's possible that the Niners are going to go much more into their base offense this year and do less 3 receiver stuff. If they're really going to be more of a run first team like Baltimore, then what do you need 3 receivers for? I mean, you play on 3rd and 7, sure, but on 2nd and 10, I just run. Keep your. So I'm thinking Kyle Juszczyk. Like, he's been on the team for 4 years. They never give him the ball enough. He always gets about 30 touches a year. He should get more. He's a guy who scores touchdowns. He's a guy who actually produces. I think they just gave him like a 5-year deal. They might actually get the ball into Kyle Juszczyk's hands more. I know he's had a very consistent level of production his whole career, but I'm thinking this year it might change because Bourne is gone. Bourne is gone.
It is, plenty of targets available, as you said, over almost 30 in the red zone where that money is made for fantasy. So we will see how those are filled, whether that's Kittle finally hitting a ceiling there, whether it's Brandon Aiyuk just continuing to be a monster in that red zone, Dwelly.
Or whether it's just Trey Lance running it in like Cam Newton.
Exactly.